What could tensions in the Red Sea cost the world? The U.S. and the U.K. fire back on land installations in Yemen in an attempt to prevent Houthi attacks on shipping vessels in the Red Sea. But will the escalation calm the waters or signal worse to come? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is conflict in the Red Sea. Well, Yemen is one of the poorest countries on the planet and the location of one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Still, when Israel attacked Gaza, the Houthis, who control key populated areas in the north of Yemen, vowed to take action in defense of Palestinians, and so started Houthi attacks on vessels passing through one of the world's most crucial shipping routes, the Red Sea leading to the Suez Canal. Now, few may have suspected their threats could lead to a major crisis, sending shocks through the global economy and mobilizing major powers to send warships to the region. It's all culminated in an attack on Yemeni land, and now Hamas has warned the U.S. and the U.K. that their airstrikes will see repercussions for regional security as well. Here's a look.
U.S. and British forces have hit the Houthis. On Thursday night, the two countries, with help from Australia, Bahrain, Canada and the Netherlands, conducted strikes on the Iran-backed group's drones, ballistic and cruise missiles and surveillance systems. The Iran-aligned group said the raids hit military sites and airfields in 5 cities in Yemen, including the capital, Sana'a, and the strategic port city of Hodeidah. It was a retaliatory response to the Houthis' increasing attacks on Israel-bound ships in the Red Sea as the conflict in Gaza continues. US President Joe Biden said he will not hesitate to take further measures to protect the trade route.
These targeted strikes are a clear message that the United States and our partners will not tolerate attacks on our personnel or allow hostile actors to imperil freedom of navigation in one of the world's most critical commercial routes.
The Houthis have carried out at least 27 attacks on vessels in the Red Sea since November last year, in an attempt to put pressure on Israel to end its offensive and blockade on the people of Gaza. In response, the US has assembled a multinational military coalition to safeguard the maritime route. And on Wednesday, the UN Security Council passed a resolution demanding that the Houthis immediately cease their offensive. On the same day, the group launched its largest drone and missile attack to date, and more followed on Thursday. After the US-led raids, the Houthis said they will continue to support Palestine by targeting the ships heading to Israel, and they warned of a heavy price.
The American and British enemy take full responsibility for their criminal aggression on our Yemeni people, which will not pass without a punishment. It will not pass without a response and a punishment. The Yemeni armed forces will not hesitate to target the sources of the threat, along with all the aggressive targets in land and at sea in defense of Yemen.
Iran said the US-British attacks are a violation of Yemen's sovereignty and warned it will fuel more insecurity and instability. Russia has requested an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council, and China has called for restraint.
We hope that all parties involved can play a constructive and responsible role in maintaining the security and stability of the Red Sea, which is in line with the common interests of the international community.
Houthi attacks have caused major disruptions to international trade, with delays and increasing freight costs. Big shipping companies, including the world's largest, Maersk, has suspended their operations in the Red Sea. And a recent report shows the number of containers passing through the route fell by 60% in December.
The key is de-escalation. No one in the commercial sector wants to see that escalation on land.
A further escalation could put more pressure on global markets and destabilise the region already suffering from brutal aggression.
Well, this week we'll remember U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned Houthis to stop or face consequences. And we're now seeing what those consequences are. But will they have the intended effect? Joining me now to debate that and more are from Delaware, David Rundell, former chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Saudi Arabia. From Cambridge, Elisabeth Kendall is the head of Girton College and board member of the Center for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge. And from Sana'a, we have pro-Houthi journalist Hussain Albukhaiti. Thanks all so much for being with me. David, I'll start with you because I think we are seeing exactly what you feared the most just a few days ago, in that the U.S. has indeed attacked Houthi targets. So do you think they've swatted the hornet's nest, so to speak, or did they have no choice?
No, they certainly had a choice. And I have said before that I think that it was ill-advised to do this at this moment, that there was an opportunity to create a larger coalition than the rather small coalition that acted against the Houthis. I think they are correct in trying to point out that the piracy and terrorism that is taking place in the Red Sea is separate and distinct from the war in Gaza, and that the war in Gaza would have ended and will probably end, and that they should have waited to see what the Houthis would do when that war was over, and that the excuse that they're using to justify these attacks had disappeared. And if they may have stopped, I don't think they would have, but if they, in any event, I think they should have waited a little bit, and I think they should have tried to develop a larger international coalition rather than the small group of people that did it.
So what are the
yesterday.
consequences, do you think, of this misstep?
Well, I think you have to wait to see what the consequences are. I doubt that it will have the effect that they wanted, that it will end these attacks. I could be wrong, but I doubt it. And I think there's a possibility that the war could expand rather than contract.
Okay.
So I think they should have waited.
Let me turn to Elisabeth then. I mean, is it possible, Elisabeth, that now we've seen the worst after this attack on Houthi territory, I mean, as well as the UN Security Council's condemnation? Or has it just made it clear how many cards the Houthis really hold, regardless of how much poorer and less well-equipped their military might be?
I doubt very much that we've seen the last of the Houthis. History dictates that they do not respond well to airstrikes or deterrence. Let's not forget, they've been embroiled in a civil war in Yemen now for 9 years, in the latest civil war, and they've suffered over 25,000 airstrikes conducted by the Saudi-led coalition, and that has not dampened their fervour. So it's very unlikely that this message will hit home. It's much more likely that it will embolden them because it feeds into their narrative of themselves as the victim, as also as the hero standing up for Palestine against these giants, these superpowers, the United States and its allies. So it might actually work rather well for them.
So what's your fear then? Same question as I asked David. What is your fear going forward now that the consequences of this attack could take the region and potentially the world into more dangerous territory?
I think there's a genuine danger now that this could spiral out of control, because if others in Iran's so-called axis of resistance now become inflamed by these actions and also perceive this as more of a civilizational war, more as a religious war of them against us, of the US and its allies against the Arab and Islamic worlds, which is how the Houthis will wish to frame it, then we could see ourselves in a spiral that gets out of control. I think it's also worth pointing out that the reaction in the region, even amongst those who are the enemies of the Houthis, like the Saudi Arabia or the UAE, has been lukewarm or actually against these attacks, probably for two reasons. One, politically, it's not good for them to be seen standing on the side of America and its allies against those who position themselves as the defenders of Palestine. And two, they have experience of the Houthis. They know what it's like to go to war with them. And albeit their military might is not as great, this hasn't been easy for any of the Houthis' enemies, and they know that they could get bogged down.
So Hussain, what do the Houthis actually want here, and what have they achieved so far?
I mean, they want a simple demand, and it's the same demand from the United Nations Secretary General and as well Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and UNICEF. They all called upon Israel to lift the blockade and to allow food and medicine and fuel and water to enter Gaza and to stop the genocide and the killing of the civilians in Gaza. Yemeni demand is that if Israeli will stop all that, they will stop all their attack that's actually only targeting an Israeli-linked ship or ships that heading to Israel. Your guest from the United States, when he called it terrorist and piracy in the Red Sea, Yemeni, before any attack against any ship, they have actually declared war against Israel and targeted Eilat port and other areas in south of occupied Palestine, and is in international law. If you are at war in a country with a country, you have the right to search and to stop and even to sink any ship, even if it's a commercial ship, if you believe that those ships are actually aiding your enemy. So it is actually not privacy, but piracy. Okay. And we have seen that many statements from Egypt, they have saying that Sina was not affected. It's only a handful of ships that's heading toward Israel, maybe on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, and any other ship, they are safe.
Fair enough. Hussain, quickly though, I mean, does it really only come down to convincing Israel to stop this assault on Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly, and if this assault will be stopped and blockade and they will allow food and medicine, the attack from Yemen will stop at the same moment.
But then if it doesn't stop, do you worry that these attacks risk, angering potential allies that the Houthis might have, including China and Russia, who are having, massive trade disruptions, as well as the rest of the world? These are potential allies of the Houthi that are also being terribly affected by this disruption in the Red Sea.
I mean, we've seen that actually Russia and China, they are not really ally of Sana'a or Sana'a forces. We have seen that the latest UN Security Council, Russia and China have abstained. So it's like they saying yes in another way, because that resolution was passed. But here in Yemen, they said all the resolution from UN Security Council, as they say, is under our feet, and it will our feet, and it will not affect us. But I want to make it clear, if what I believe what's going to happen is what the Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansarullah, have said 2 weeks ago and as well yesterday. He said if there is any attack will be conducted from UK and United States against Yemen, Yemeni will retaliate in a big and huge attack against all military ship of those two countries in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and in the Arabian Sea. And the United States should understand that using force is not going to work. We've seen what happened during these 9 wars. Here, Ansarullah, the Houthi and Yemeni army has become much stronger, and they have better weapons, and they know how to use them.
Exactly. So, David, I mean, I'm going to ask you the same question, David. Is it just that simple, that if Israel just stops its assault on Gaza, this mess in the Red Sea will end? Is it that simple?
Well, I think the Houthis are the ones that are going to answer that. I disagree with your other speaker. There have been ships that were attacked that had nothing to do with Israel. Okay, so the claim that this is purely trying to interdict ships going to Israel is inaccurate. You could argue that they're attempting to shut down the Suez Canal and thereby put pressure on the rest of the world to do something. That you could argue, but to say that this is only about ships going to Israel is simply inaccurate. Okay. The second point that he made, just let me finish, please. The second point about whether the Houthis are doing this purely at the behest of Iran to create more trouble, or whether they seriously are trying to help the people in Gaza, we have to wait and see. I wrote in an article for Unheard yesterday that the war in Gaza will end at some point, hopefully soon, for many reasons, and that we should just wait and see what the Houthis do then. And if the Houthis stop their attacks, then they'll be proven to have been accurate and correct in what they said. I tend to think that that may not be the case, but we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, let me get to Elisabeth, though. I mean, in the meantime, though, how sustainable is it to keep these warships in the Red Sea, firing million-dollar missiles at cheap drones that the Houthis, or cheaper drones that the Houthis are using?
Well, as you point out, one of the problems here is that it is an unequal fight. The US-led coalition's weaponry is very expensive, and their counterstrikes have to be accurate, whereas the Houthis can keep going for quite a long time with much less accuracy. All they have to do is really have a scattergun approach in the Red Sea to achieve the results that they're looking for, which are to not just to bring international attention to the problem in Israel, but also to worry financial markets, to raise the stakes, and to therefore divert international trade. So it's a really cheap option for the Houthis. And therefore, I think it could probably go on for quite some time. I'm not sure that it would be possible to take out some of their launch sites and hope that this will go away. I agree with David that this is not going to achieve its end goal, at least not immediately, and that the Houthis have a lot of experience of doing a lot with a little. So this won't end soon.
And in the meantime, Elisabeth, I mean, quickly address, if you can, I know it's a huge question, but the global dynamics here, in that we have the war on Gaza that many fear will spread, the war in Ukraine, and we have China still saying it would potentially take back Taiwan and then go into the South China Sea, have trouble with neighbors there. How frightening of a time right now is it to have this issue in the Red Sea raise its head like this?
I think this is very bad timing for this to reach such an escalated level in the Red Sea with so much else going on in the world at the moment. Now, on the one hand, it was, in a sense, very difficult to do nothing about it because clearly these attacks need to be responded to in some way. I'm not sure that all diplomatic routes were exhausted. Oman may still have been able to keep lines open. But the fear now is that the retaliation could be terrible because we have Iran's axis of resistance really surrounding Israel and able to wreak havoc on the region. We have obviously Hamas to the west of Israel. We have Hezbollah in the north in Lebanon. We have Iran-backed militias in the east and also in the northeast in Iraq and in Syria. And then we've got the Houthis in the south, in Yemen and the Red Sea. So really, we have a recipe here for a much greater conflict to spread in the region.
Okay, Elisabeth, that will have to be the final word for this segment of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us. Let's get more focused now on the implications for our global economy. And joining me from Copenhagen is the CEO of the consultancy Vespucci Maritime, Lars Jensen. Lars, thanks so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. First, I have to ask you a somewhat simpler question and have you explain why it matters to everyone that what is happening in the Red Sea is consequential, because your average consumer has no idea how much and what kind of products come through this route, to the point that any disruption in that supply chain can cost them at home.
Yes. If you go down to your usual supermarket or hardware store, even if you sit at home, take a look around, and I bet you virtually everything you see around you have been moved in a container, and a large amount of that has been moved in a container that moved through the Suez Canal. So blocking off the Suez Canal route is going to impact every conceivable item you see around you. It's going to be delayed. It's going to be more costly to bring it there. Okay.
You know, a few weeks ago, I know you spoke to the media, and you didn't sound overly concerned about the effects of this standoff on inflation in particular. But are you feeling any different now, given this latest escalation, and that the U.S. has indeed attacked, and the U.K. as well, Houthi targets on land?
No, I'm basically of the same opinion. We need to distinguish two things here. One thing is the effect we see right now. Right now, supply chains are stretched. Everything is going to be quite a bit delayed because of this. Everything is going to cost more. However, once we start to settle in services that go around Africa on a normal basis, this can be managed. This is basically the consequence of shipping lines having ordered too many ships. They ordered too many ships the last few years. The problem just prior to the crisis was actually overcapacity. That means, in very practical terms, if we have to go around Africa, it can be done. It will take a little bit longer. It will cost a little more, but nothing to the degree that we looked at during the pandemic. It's only very short term now that everything is in flux, that it's difficult to handle. If this crisis drags on, supply chains will reroute around Africa, but it will not be a disaster scenario.
Okay. I mean, maybe only a disaster for the industry itself, because it's going to take a huge loss. I mean, insecurity in the Red Sea for them means a lot more than just, a detour. It takes 40% longer to go around the Cape of Good Hope. And some question actually as well the quality of the ports along the way that can't really support that kind of traffic, which ultimately costs shippers and then consumers so much more.
Yeah, you see, the challenge here is from a global perspective, as I said, it's not a big disaster, but some countries are much more impacted than others. The ones that are the worst affected here are clearly countries with ports to the Red Sea. So that would be Saudi as the largest, but also countries such as Sudan, Jordan, heavily impacted. If you're sitting at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, like Turkey does, for example, this is also a major problem because the detour you then have to go from, say, China to Turkey for products is going to be at least 2 weeks longer. So this is a case where countries in the Red Sea, countries in the eastern Mediterranean, they will feel the worst impact, whereas North Europe and the US, they will be much less impacted by this.
I have to ask you as well, because we spoke a little bit about this on the panel, and in how much the Houthis actually really need hardware-wise to do some pretty serious damage, though, in the area, and that they're using these kind of smaller, cheaper drones to hit ships or try to hit ships. But at the very least, they just intimidate shippers who won't have a choice but to take these hugely long and expensive routes.
And that's exactly the root of the problem. If you're looking at one of the largest container ships in the world, they're the size of a US aircraft carrier. So hitting that with a small attack drone, sure, it can do some damage, but it's never going to sink the ship. That's not the concern. The concern is if it hits part of the cargo, containers get on fire and that fire becomes uncontrollable, you can actually lose the whole ship. We have seen that in industrial fires before. That's the key reason why major container lines sent their ships around Africa. One container ship alone, apart from the cruise safety, of course, you are also carrying cargo value to the tune of about $1 billion on just one ship. So even small attack drones are a real and genuine threat.
Let me ask you how vulnerable really the global economy is right now. I mean, you said it's not going to be as bad as the pandemic. I hope you're right about that. But still, there are many questioning what central bankers are going to do about lowering interest rates, which so many people were looking forward to. I mean, will they be able to do so? Will this impact that decision?
From my perspective, I would say it shouldn't. The price increases that we have seen the last couple of weeks, they are going to be temporary. They're going to last until Chinese New Year on February 10th. Then they are going to abate. We are not looking at a pandemic-like scenario, nowhere near it. So to say this should have an impact on overall interest rate policy or that this should have a major inflationary impact would be to misread the situation.
What about the military costs for the countries that are now involved in this? We've heard people say the U.S., for example, is very overstretched anyway right now. But now you also have countries like India, we've seen sending almost military escorts in with some of their cargo ships to protect this. This is not a cheap endeavor to try to bring protection and security to shipping routes in this region.
That is correct, but I think that has to be seen in a slightly different context. It has to be seen in the context of how much are we willing to spend in terms of resources to defend the freedom of the seas. This is part of a larger issue that to me doesn't involve just the Red Sea. It also involves future flashpoints, as was also mentioned with your panelists before, flashpoints such as South China Sea, the Taiwan Straits, the Strait of Hormuz. So this I see as part of a larger effort to reinforce freedom of the seas in general.
So in this, that you think the Chinese New Year is one of those dates that we should watch for when this could kind of settle down. Is that when you think we'll know that all is okay?
Basically, yes. What maybe not a lot of people know is Chinese New Year for container shipping is extremely important. After that, the Chinese factories close for a while and you don't produce any goods. So in the weeks before Chinese New Year, there is a huge surge of cargo that needs to be shipped out of China. When this crisis in the Red Sea broke out, the ships that were going to China got affected. They were the ships that have all the empty containers we need for that cargo out in China. those containers are now not going to arrive in time. That is what's creating the short-term problem. After Chinese New Year, the empty containers will arrive. At the same time, the factories are closed, and we can get the supply chains under control.
Okay, Lars, I'm really happy that we can actually leave this edition of the Newsmakers on a somewhat upbeat note, because we've been hearing so much negativity, I should say, going forward because of what's been happening. So thank you for that outlook. We greatly appreciate it. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So we'd like to thank you for joining us, and our viewers, of course, for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.